Hello and welcome to the Horse Show. Well, we're just a week away now from the start of the Olympic Games. But the dream of becoming an Olympian or a Paralympian started a long time ago. And my guest this week has such aspirations. Her name is Mellisa Davis Warden, and she's had what can best be described as a tumultuous couple of years. From being a happy event rider and an ultramarathon runner, a wife and mother, Mellisa experienced a life-changing accident that started with a badly broken leg, eventually becoming so painful and with additional complications, she was driven to make the toughest of decisions, to amputate below the knee. Fast forward 2 years this week since the cycling accident in Berlin that changed her world, and Mellisa is riding now with a prosthetic leg and sometimes without it. She's even managed to tack up unaided and every day is making progress, even starting to jump again. And this week she's trying out a horse for para-dressage with her sights set on Paris 2024 and even Los Angeles 2028. Mellisa shares her story of tragedy and triumph to where new doors are now opening and ambitions for her are growing. Her inspiring story will make you think about how we view life when faced with adversity and to turn a setback into an opportunity. Mellisa, hi, and thank you for joining me. How are you today?
Hi, Chris. I'm fabulous. How are you doing?
I'm doing so far so good. Now, you have a wonderful story to tell, but I should ask how you are right now. You're in South Carolina and getting back on your pony and enjoying your riding again. So how was today?
Today was probably one of the best days. I can't say each day gets better, but the milestones become greater every day. So today was really fabulous. I was able to tack up my own horse and lead her out to the mounting block without crutches and mount for the first time without anyone holding her or assisting me up onto the mounting block or even strapping my foot into the stirrup. And so that was quite huge.
So you have to actually attach your foot into the stirrup, do you, the prosthetic?
Well, I don't have to, but it was advised by another rider he's a below knee amputee, right leg, and he recommended using an elastic. And it's what a lot of riders tend to use. And so it's actually worked very well. I attempted before my revision and all the setbacks that I had about 2 months ago, I attempted to ride without the elastic and I kept losing my stirrup. And then all of a sudden I found my leg getting longer and longer and I couldn't understand what was wrong. But because I don't have that proprioception, using the rubber band has helped immensely.
Interesting. And do you have any pain when you're riding with a prosthetic?
I have sensations, but I wouldn't say that there's pain that limits what I'm able to do at this point.
And you said to me before we started recording, Mellisa, that this experience has made you very humble and that you wouldn't actually change anything. And you often hear that from para-athletes, the experience that they've gone through, however tragic and awful it's been, that they've grown, they've learnt so much, and they've developed a whole new world through this. And you feel strongly about that, don't you?
Very, very much so. I wish the initial accident that had led to this hadn't occurred. And actually, Wednesday is the 2-year anniversary of the accident. So I'm dreading it just a little bit because I'm sure it'll be emotional. But since amputating my leg 5 months ago, I wouldn't go back to having my leg as it was because the pain was so bad and the limitations were so great. And I never knew, it gave out on a cross country course one time. Another day I went from being able to jump, about 1.10 meters, 3.6. And then suddenly I couldn't jump a cross rail because I landed wrong in the stirrup and it just was so painful that I couldn't handle it. And so anyway, I wouldn't take that back if you paid me. Yeah. I would much rather deal with where I am right this second and redevelop myself and relearn everything than to go back to being in pain and suffering. And everyone thought that I looked like I was fine, but inside I was dying. There's the constant pain and the anxiety from not knowing when the pain was going to happen again or how great it was going to get. And like the sleepless nights with that anxiety, it just compounds, and it's real. It is definitely real. Let's
go back to what Mellisa was doing before the accident. Tell us what your riding looked like then.
So before the accident, I had a failed polo pony who I was eventing preliminary. And I just picked up a 3-year-old off the track and was restarting her. And then I had a friend's horse on lease that was going novice. And the prelim horse was schooling intermediate questions and playing with the idea, this was 2019, playing with the idea that in 2020 he would move up to intermediate, even though he was little, but I had to give him a very accurate ride. And he really demanded support off the ground. The 3-year-old is a Stormcat granddaughter by out of a Stormy Atlantic mare. And so she is full of sass and opinions. And the other gelding that I was riding, I was leasing from a friend that was going novice, also a Stormcat, but very kind. And I was just enjoying riding 3 lovely, different but high quality horses.
So you were extremely competitive then and ambitious, I would imagine.
Relatively. I mean, the failed polo pony wasn't the most fabulous mover, but he could finish in the ribbons pretty consistently. And, big hopes for the filly that she would potentially be my next upper level horse, like big upper level horse. And, I never thought the polo pony would actually, I thought he'd be a nice novice packer for somebody one day. I never expected him to be a training, let alone a prelim horse. And so he just continued to exceed my expectations. So I was just enjoying it. I was returning to be an amateur. So I was finishing out my year of not taking horses in for training or teaching. And I'd been so busy that I was learning to find the passion in my riding again. And so riding these 3 horses that every day I just giggled when I rode them.
And what age would you have been then, Mellisa?
I was 38.
And when did your riding story actually begin? Were you riding as a young child?
So I started riding at a small school in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, where my aunt and grandmother have a farm. And my aunt would set lessons up for me on school horses, and I was about 4 years old. And then I ended up with my first pony on the West Coast, which is where we lived, when I was just rising 5. And he was the devil, but he taught me so much. I think he gave me more concussions as a child than anyone should probably ever experience. But he also just really taught me how to be determined and resilient and to never give up.
They can be little devils, can't they?
Oh, he was like the son of Hades.
So riding has always been in your life then. It's just something you've always done, your chosen sport. But you also were a runner, you told me. Ultra runner.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a state thrower in high school and was offered collegiate scholarships to throw. I was a shot put and discus specialist, which is not what you'd expect from a distance runner. And turned those down, as well as I was involved in music, and turned all that down because I wanted to do something a little bit different, although I wasn't quite sure what it was. But I ran cross country my senior year in high school to get a bit of a head start on training for the spring season. And I was 190 pounds, had a 6-pack. I'm 5'9", so not a little person by any means. And my coach's goal was for me to run the entire 5K. And what I ended up doing was I ended up on the varsity team, which was kind of fun, and made it to state, and ended up like having more fun with the girls that didn't have confidence and were like hurting so that they didn't want to finish. And so I would just kind of hang back and run with them, which really wasn't what I was supposed to be doing at all. But I would even go back out and I would run in with them because I wanted to see them succeed. And so that is sort of how I started running. And then in between my senior year in high school and college, I took a year off. I graduated high school with my associate's degree because of a program in the Northwest that was really cool called Running Start. So I took a year off and tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So I was a working student on the East Coast and decided I didn't want to do horses for a living. And then went back out west, and there was a 12K I'd run since I was about 6 years old. Or I'd completed, I should say, since I was about 6 years old. And I went and I ran that, and I was like, I got a pretty good time. I think I'm going to look for a half marathon, but I couldn't find a half marathon. So I very intelligently chose a marathon down a mountainside in Bend, Oregon. And I got up to running 15 miles, and I was very diligent about it. And I tried to read everything I could on nutrition. And keep in mind, this would have been 2000. So I was 19 years old, and no one I knew had ever had these experiences. And so I went and I did it. And I finished second in my age group, or I finished second female overall, and I won a bottle of vodka.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but at 19, you can't have it. So they gave me a nice little martini glass, which I still have. And I said I'd never run another marathon. I hated it so much, but I loved running. And it was a means to an end to be fit and get the best bang for your buck. So fast forward a few years, and actually after I ran a half marathon, and then I actually joined the crew team in college. And because I was so fit from all of the running I'd been doing and with all the hill work, I ended up with one of the fastest erg times on land. And that put me in a top boat that ended up going to nationals. That was my junior year in college. And I didn't row my senior year because I really felt like I needed to focus on school. And it really, like, running gave me this base that I could ride anything. I wasn't really riding much. At that point, I had one horse I did the jumpers with in Canada, but I could ride anything I wanted to, and I didn't get tired. And I was strong, and I could eat anything I wanted, which was the most important part.
Yeah, that's tremendous. I mean, and that sort of self-confidence as well, and to being an all-round athlete as you were. As you said, it's unusual to be a runner and a thrower.
Right.
So you obviously had a combination of skills there. Is that something that was in the family? Were they sporty?
So my mom was a tennis player, was a very good tennis player, and a decent skier. And my father was actually training with the U.S. ski team and snapped both Achilles tendons, which kept him out of Vietnam. But his training consisted of every other day running 16 miles, and then on the off days he played soccer or he skied. And so he was very deliberate that as I came up and I became an athlete and through academics and other extracurricular activities, that I needed to have multiple things that I was involved in so that I wasn't putting all of my eggs in one basket.
Yeah. Very good idea. Now, did you grow up out west in the mountains?
So I grew up on a boat.
So a long way from ski slope then.
Really, very different. So my parents were both sailors. After my father had his skiing accident, he ended up getting into boats. He was an architect, and my parents met in Connecticut. My father had his boat at Mystic Seaport, and anyway, they ended up getting married. And when they were pregnant with me, they had a 35-foot sailboat, and it was decided that if they were going to cruise and have a family, they needed something bigger. So the builder and the designer were all in the Northwest. And so that's how we ended up in Port Townsend, Washington, because it was just a couple hours from the designer and the builder was right there. So the idea was to sail around the world. And at age 5, I got into ponies, and the rest is pretty much history. We made it to the San Juan Islands a couple times. That was about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's fabulous for sailing up there, but there are not many ponies up near Port Townsend.
No. And the pony club I ended up in was sort of revitalized. And so that gave me, I started with 4-H, and then I did pony club. And so I guess it was about the time I was going into pony club. We went and watched this horse trial that was in North Bend on the east side of Seattle. So like right at the base of the mountains of the Cascades. And I wanted to ride in it. And so my father said the following year, he goes, if you want to ride, if you're going to compete, you have to volunteer. So my introduction to the sport, before I'd ever even gone cross country once, was in 1992, building a prelim, like zigzag combination downhill next to Todd Truwin right when he returned from the Olympics. And so, I knew who he was, and I'm not a very starstruck individual, but like what an opportunity to be working alongside the course designer who's just returned from competing internationally at the top of the sport. And I was 12.
Wow. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
That's a good start.
Yeah. And then my father ended up becoming the course designer and course builder for our pony club horse trials on Bainbridge Island. And so I spent most of my summers working with him, building and discussing like design and what horses saw. And that's not something that 13-year-old kids in the 90s did. So it was very fortunate. He had such a good eye. Most of the fences that he built are actually still in existence at the state park. And I went back a couple of years ago and ran through the park, and seeing, a 45-degree leading edge on a table back then wasn't very common, but he was doing that. And it's really neat to see that he gave me that start.
Yeah, that really is. I mean, a really good foundation, give you a good eye as well. I'm just thinking when you said Bainbridge Island, wasn't Maya Black from up that part of the world? Maybe not on Bainbridge, but
Maya was on Whidbey, as is Adrian. Yep, Adrian Lyle. So definitely some fabulous ladies from that part of the world.
Who would have thought? Because really, it's not the biggest horse community. It's not exactly like Aiken or Middleburg, is it?
No. And we were very fortunate to have some fabulous instructors. Linda Chatfield was on Whidbey Island, and then Carol McCardle, who Adrian trained with as a young rider, and then I was able to ride with her a bit. Was actually, I think she was an Olympic rider and then ended up going to dressage. So we were very fortunate to have these great riders in the area. And then, of course, as I became older, Amy Tryon was one of the greats to go school with. Yeah. And so, the Northwest has produced other fabulous riders like Jill Walton, who is still continuing to bring really, really nice horses through the levels. And she's over in Montana. So we've been, while you wouldn't expect it, we've been very blessed to have some quality riders and coaches.
Most definitely. Well, what a wonderful foundation for your riding career. And I want to now fast forward to what is now 2 years ago this week. Okay. That, your husband, I understand, was stationed in Berlin, Germany, and you went to visit him.
Yeah. So he was actually, he's in the U.S. Navy. He's in the reserves now. He's a commander, and he took a 60 or 90-day post over in Stuttgart. And so my daughter, who's 15 now, she was 13 at the time, and I went over to visit. And we chose to go to Berlin because there was a concert she wanted to go see. And once you're over in Europe, hopping on a plane and jumping from city to city is quite affordable. So as you probably know. And so we went up to Berlin for the weekend. Sunday was the concert. Saturday, we went all over the city and probably walked well over 40 kilometers. And then Sunday morning, decided to rent bikes and ride all over the city so we could see a bit more. And about lunchtime, we were coming back from the East Wall, sort of back to like Marine Platz, which is like the middle of the city. And the bike lane changed from right along the sidewalk to in between a trolley line. And then there were cars that were parked right next to the sidewalk. So you had to move over. There wasn't a choice. The bike lane moved. And so I went to come to a complete stop so I wouldn't hit the trolley line, knowing that I would probably go flying. And instead, as I came to a stop, I did hit it. And I did go flying. I became a nice physics experiment. And I put my foot down to land it like I would on a mountain bike, and instead went down. And some people rushed out to help me get up out of the road. And when I was standing on my right leg, I went to just put my left foot down for balance, and it detached from my body. So it was a closed, comminuted fracture.
And in that moment, did you collapse with pain?
No, I went from, initially I thought it was fractured when I was sitting there, and then I felt some movement, and I was like, okay, it's broken, but I can tape it and keep going. It'll be fine. And then when it displaced, all I could think of was crap. Like, this is not good. Now I'm going to have to go to the hospital. This has just ruined everything. But two very lovely female doctors pulled me out of the road. They were eating lunch at a cafe across the street, and they pulled me out of the road and dialed for an ambulance. And I was taken less than 2 kilometers away to Charité Hospital, which is a famous teaching hospital in Berlin. And then that's where I stayed for the next 2 weeks through multiple surgeries.
When you say multiple surgeries, how many were there? Or actually, whilst that first go round, Mellisa, and
yes,
and what were they actually doing to the foot?
So they attempted to set my leg twice. I ruptured the ligaments between my tib and fib, and broken my fibula in 2 places. And then there was a bunch of other damage that they didn't know about until I went in for the second surgery. But since they weren't able to set it, they tried 4 times while I was awake. And since they weren't able to set it, they took me into surgery and gave me a 50% chance as they wheeled me in of amputation that day. And so they did an external fixator, which is like a giant metal exoskeleton. And it was pinned into the top of my foot, the sides of my heel, into my calcaneus, and then into my tibia in 2 places, just below my knee and then about halfway down. And they waited a week. They're hoping to be able to do the second surgery and pin everything together within a few days, but there was so much swelling that they couldn't do it. And so a week later, they took me back into surgery and pinned and plated everything together. And when I woke up and the surgeon came in, he said that there was a lot more damage to the distal end of my tibia, so right above like my talus, what creates the top of your ankle. And so they actually ended up cutting my saphenous nerve, which is the main nerve that runs down the front of your leg. So I couldn't feel my foot when I came out of surgery. And that was it was like the first red flag, I guess. They'd brought in specialists from Switzerland to try and work on me. So every day I saw different surgeons with different ideas of how to fix me. And so after the second surgery, which was the best that they could do, I went through a little physical therapy in the hospital. And then they sent me home and wished me the best.
And specifically, what was their prognosis at that point then?
So they said I should be able to return to everything. But there was already like an onset of arthritis in the ankle. They didn't know how long it had been there or why it was there. And, as I think probably most athletes can attest, you end up with lots of injuries. You have niggles that you have a sprained ankle. You come off a horse and you sprain your ankle, and you have, issues from horses dumping you, and then your back starts to have problems, right? So we all have these issues, and we all have probably arthritis in our bodies. I don't think most of us would pass a vet check, in all fairness. But they thought that I would be able to return to everything that I was doing.
So you were hopeful at that time in yourself, or were you thinking, okay, well, that's what they're telling me, but this is not what I'm feeling?
Oh, I was totally hopeful. So the only other bones I've broken, I broke my zygomatic process, which is my your cheekbone, and I've broken my nose a few times, and then fingers. But I've never broken a bone. I've never broken an arm. I'd never broken a leg, and I have. I'd already been in contact with my physical therapist, who is a friend, also would be a lovely person to have on the podcast. She's the physio for the U.S. endurance team. She's here in Aiken. Her name's Lisa Birch, and she's worked with triathletes and riders for years. And so I was already in contact with her and making a plan of how to go forward when I was released. But I had to have another surgery first, and that was to remove screws that were holding my tib and fib in place just above my ankle. And so that was done at 12 weeks. And until that point, I wasn't 100% weight bearing.
But you could ride?
I rode with a cast. So I rode in running shorts and a cast. And that was right before I was supposed to go to AECs. So my little polo pony was qualified for pre-limit AECs, and then the TIP championships the following week. And I was riding in a cast and jumping. The first time I jumped was the Sunday of AECs, and that was at a friend's barn in Kentucky with my cast. So they removed the screws and everything was good, and I was coming back and physical therapy was going okay, but I wasn't getting any more dorsiflexion. So like heels down, toes up was just not really happening. I was maybe getting 10 degrees, but that was like, they were having to work really hard and I was having to work really hard in physical therapy with that. And so my first event back was the Hagyard Team Challenge training 3-day. And that was, it was almost exactly 3 months to the day from the surgery, or from the accident, rather. And that was on the polo pony. So, if you're going to do it, go big or go home, right? And everyone that I'd spoken with that had broken legs said, look, it's going to take a year. It's going to suck for a year and you're going to be in pain, but just do it anyway, because there's really not much option. You can either sit around or you can return. So I got through that with some goodie powders, and there was a little bourbon maybe sitting at the that box before I went out on cross country. And then we celebrated with champagne afterwards, because it was something that no one thought could be done. And it did. It happened. It was great. And then about 2 weeks after that, I was stuck on a cross country course trying to get off in a thunderstorm in Virginia. I was up there for the CCI 1-star, and I was in so much pain. I couldn't even get to the golf cart to get out of the weather. So I hid under a fence. And that's when I knew that things were getting bad.
Don't go away. We'll be right back after this commercial break to hear more of Mellissa's story. What was actually happening to your leg, to your foot at that point?
I don't know when it started, but I developed a bone spur. on the lateral or inside side of my tibia that was going down into my talus. So similar to a horse with a bone spur on their pastern, or like in their fetlock, I was basically developing this bone spur so it couldn't rotate. And so every step I took was just like a knife in my leg. And that continued to develop. But then in the process, and I didn't know how bad it was. And it progressed pretty fast. I was losing all the cartilage in the joint. And so I was bone on bone, not just on top, but on the sides. So as I rolled, I just rolled bone across bone. And so when I saw a new orthopedist whose daughter is a rider and wife rides at the end of November. So that was the end of October. So middle of November, I saw him. And he told me very bluntly what my options were, but also having a military background, he understood people that are a little bit driven, maybe deemed crazy. And he said he would do what he could to help me. And we injected my ankle that day. And I walked without pain for about 48 hours, and then it was back. So what followed was a series of specialists all over the Southeast, up to Vanderbilt and Nashville, and even saw one of the team docs for the Carolina Panthers, who specializes in this stuff. Maybe in the future, when you're 55, 60, we can do a total ankle replacement. But when I started doing research on being able to ride and being able to run with a fusion and an ankle replacement, the data was pretty hit or miss. And so that sort of began my quest to find all the answers that I could and all the options that I could to try and regain my life. So that was December 2019. And it's sort of when everything really hit hard. I started seeing a therapist, and I can't stress enough how important it is when you go through that kind of trauma. I didn't really think it was going to help, but suddenly it hit me how much of my life I'd lost. So I'm a TD and a judge, an event TD and an event judge. And I couldn't walk horses anymore, and measuring fences became extremely difficult for me and very painful. And so that was sort of I won't say my career, but it took up a lot of my time, and I really loved doing it and giving back to the sport that way. But then during the week, I was a vet tech for my veterinarian here in Aiken. And so I couldn't jog horses. I couldn't squat to scrub joints. And, not to mention the fact that I was now being pulled back in my riding, and I couldn't run anymore. And if you have something that is an outlet for you, like running, or people that get on the cycle or swim, if you can't do that, it is extremely painful. And all the memes out there that joke about, I run because orange doesn't look good on me. There's something truthful about it, because it's just so excruciating to watch other people do the things that you love and you're struggling to walk. So through 2020, I kept seeing the same orthopedist over he's in Augusta, Georgia, and he's just, the man's a saint because he's dealt with me for the past couple of years. And he referred me to different people to see for second opinions in his clinic. We tried an AFO, which is a brace to try and relieve some of the pressure to allow me to run. And I was able to do it, but it was slow, it was cumbersome, I ended up in pain because I still couldn't get my ankle to 90 degrees. And then he would send me to other doctors to get opinions. And I think it was probably August, September of 2020, I told him, I said, what else do I have to do if I was going to amputate? Because this is becoming very clear that this is probably the best option for my life. And at that point, I needed to see a psychiatrist. And so you need to cover all these bases when you're making an elective decision like this. And so I saw this very lovely psychiatrist through the University of South Carolina. And I left the first time and I said, "So you think I'm crazy, don't you?" And he goes, "I don't think you're crazy. I think you've been through a lot of trauma and you've had exceptional loss in your life." And he encouraged me he goes, "The next time I see you, I don't want you to be thinking of what other people think you should do. I want you to have done the research so that you know what you want." Because I was trying to be open-minded through this entire process. And every time I came up with a question of what would be possible, I was told it was too late. If only that was 2 months before, I would have had a chance. So after, I don't know, probably I think it was my fifth second opinion. And I'd seen the psychiatrist and everything had been cleared. I said that I wouldn't go forward with amputation until I couldn't compete at novice anymore. And it was starting to affect my riding and I couldn't gallop anymore. And so in October, I was in Florida at an event and my lovely now 4-year-old came downhill to an oxer and my leg gave out on me and she ran out. And I stayed on, but I knew right then that it was pretty much over.
And the reality for the future was?
I'd been fighting all along and now I had to fight to find somebody that was willing to do the amputation. The orthopedist was willing to do it, but he, having left the Army 7 years before, hadn't done one in quite a few years and wanted me to see the best of the best. So then the hunt began. And in the process, I learned that it's the best thing you can do when you have issues is just start reaching out to random human beings that are doing what you want to do and have experienced something similar to you. So I was listening to a podcast one day, and I don't even remember what the podcast was, but there was this guy on there from an organization called Amputee Blade Runners, and they're out of Nashville, Tennessee, and they supply running blades and athletic feet for individuals that maybe can't afford them, or insurance isn't going to cover it, or people that were athletes before, to try and help get them back, because typically insurance in the US doesn't cover a running blade. And if it will, it covers a very small portion. So on a whim, I reached out to them and I said, look, have you dealt with anyone like me that is a runner or a rider and has made this choice to amputate? And if you have, is there any way that you could possibly connect them to me or ask them if they would speak with me? And I received a phone call from the director, and he said, well, we have a co-founder that's in Savannah, Georgia. How far is that from you? And I said, 2.5 hours. He said, would you be willing to drive down there? He's a Paralympic gold medalist in the 400 meters, and he'd be willing to work with you. So I have to note that at this point, after I lost all of this, the 2019, I started freaking out about what I was going to do in the future because I was 38, not dead. And so I needed to be able to have to work, and I needed to be able to do something in my eyes that gives back to others. And so initially I looked at MBA programs and realized that that probably wasn't going to be a life I would be happy with. And then one night, while doing research on amputation, I looked into what it would take to be a prosthetist. And I looked at the requirements of there's only about 12 schools in the US that have a prosthetist and orthotist program. And I looked at what I've done, and I have a bachelor's in political science because I was supposed to go to law school. And I realized that this could be a path for me. So I was about 24 credits away from prerequisites. And having been out of college for close to 20 years, I went back and I took all the math and all the science. And in May of 2021, I finished my last prerequisite and I have a 4.0, which is not what I had when I was an undergrad 20 years ago. So part of being able to apply to these schools is you have to shadow. And with COVID, I'd begun shadowing at a lovely local prosthetic clinic and orthotic clinic, but with COVID, nobody wanted to take the chance of having more additional people in there. And so when I spoke with the director of Amputee Blade Runners, or ABR, he said that I would potentially be able to shadow this prosthetist. And so since I think it was October 8th of 2020, I've been driving 2.5 hours each way every week, sometimes 2 days a week, to Savannah, Georgia. And I spend the day with fabulous humans that are making the world a better place. And they've really opened my eyes to the struggles out there. With a lot of amputees, it's because of vascular disease or diabetes, and trauma is just a very small percentage, as is cancer. I think cancer is like 2 or 3% of all amputees. And so with his assistance, with this prosthetist assistance, I found a surgeon that does the surgery that we were looking for, which is called an erdl. It's a bone bridge between the tib and fib, and it gives a little more stability in the leg. And so February 9th, 2021, we amputated, went in for surgery.
That must have been a huge psychological challenge for you, much less, the physical aspect of it. I think at that point, Mellisa, I mean, you had come to the decision to do that.
So I had really good support. And I think for anyone that is experiencing the same thing, that is the most important part is, when I would talk or speak with the therapist, we discussed like the accident I didn't consent to, the follow-up I didn't consent to, and making this choice to amputate is the one thing I did consent to. And as odd as it sounds, it was like the first step of taking my life back.
Yeah. So you could determine then what your future would look like and plan ahead. I mean, and actually then, have a vision for the future, which was uncertain until that point.
Yes. And when I made the decision, and when I had the surgery date, it was 2 weeks before the surgery. And so I spent the next 2 weeks doing everything in the gym to possibly prepare myself and be as strong as I possibly could. And then at the same time, I was still competing my now 5-year-old mare. And so surgery was Tuesday. The Saturday before, I competed her at her first training level horse trials, and she was fabulous, jumped double clear cross country. And that was sort of where I wanted to like put a pin in my life, or I was comfortable putting a pin in my life and like just taking a break. Was I wanted to have her competing at training so that she had those miles behind her. And it sounds like probably a weird place to want to be willing to stop at. But at that point, I felt like I had succeeded somehow. Anyway, so Saturday she had her first training horse trial. And then Sunday we had a going away party for Lefty. And we drank mimosas and champagne and bourbon and had a Zoom call where friends from all over the world actually called in and said their goodbyes. And it was a party. I walked around barefoot in the mud on a really cold day. and my coach wrote more leg on my foot. And it was just this beautiful memorial while I still had my leg or my foot. I guess I still had my leg, but I still had my foot. And then so Monday I spent the last day in the clinic and with all of the patients, and I was able to see everyone, and then spent the night down in Savannah, and then Tuesday went in for surgery. And Wednesday I was home, and it was like dealing with the pain was pretty tough. That was probably the worst thing that I've dealt with. I'd put it up there with childbirth, which I actually still remember quite well. And but I was very religious about using a mirror for mirror therapy and doing the desensitization exercises. And so at a month, I was able to sit on a horse again. I rode a friend's really, really phenomenal draft cross. And so that was like, that gave me a little life back because I could do stuff again. And then at 2 months, I was able to get back on my mare, Lucy. And riding her was like being home. And she's, she's Stormcat, so she's very opinionated and very sassy and has quite the spook in her. But she's also just so exceptionally kind. And so she was the only horse in the barn that wasn't afraid of the walker when I came down to the barn with a walker the first day. And she's the only horse that's really allowed me to use my crutches, or I call them ninja sticks, like up close and personal with her. And she doesn't take offense to it. So I never would have expected this 3-year-old that should have been a phenomenal racehorse to be a para horse and to be a therapy horse, but she's really stepped up to the plate, which is kind of cool.
Well, that's super. I mean, and now you're back on, as we said earlier, you're back riding and becoming more and more independent. And obviously this has changed your plans for the future, your ambitions, but it's also given you other opportunities too, understand, in terms of para sport.
So I don't know if it's necessarily changed my plans for the future. I've always been the person that if you tell me I can't do it, I'm going to figure out how to prove you wrong. So there are riders that have reached out to me through friends overseas. One is a gentleman that was from South Africa and in Australia. He competed through the old 2-star level, I think maybe even the 3-star level back when there was roads and tracks. And he's a below knee amputee. And I have a friend who was a fabulous young rider named Andrew Deemer up in Southern Pines. And Andrew is a right below knee after throwing some clots from surgery. And he was back playing polo cross within a few months. And he's jumped his polo cross mare, 1.30 m at home, and has evented her training and was schooling prelim with her. And so, he was very consistent that there's not much that's going to stop you. And then even more so, there's a gentleman in Minnesota named Mike Schultz, and he's he's a little different. So he's actually an X Games gold medalist, and he's a skier and a motocross rider, and lost his leg in a snowmobile race above the knee, and he was told that he would never be able to return to things that he loved. And so he started a company called Biodapt in his garage, and he took the shocks out of his bikes and he started making joints. So he makes like a lifting foot. He has a knee that's special for snowboarding and for skiing, and he's gone back and he's a gold medalist again in the X Games. And so his riding is a little bit different because they do, I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, but it's like ultra trail riding competitions where they do these extreme obstacles on horseback, and they, similar to eventing, go up and down these incredible drops, and then they'll like gallop along and with like a jousting stick, I guess, they'll pick the rings off of, you know, like you would practice jousting, like off of like hangers. And when I watch him ride, and he's, like I said, he's an above knee, so this is something kind of unheard of. You can't tell that he's missing his leg. No, so I reached out to him before I had surgery, and I told him the situation. And Mike's been another amazing human being to talk to, because he's like, below knee, there's absolutely nothing to stop you. You will be completely unlimited.
That must have given you tremendous hope.
It's huge, right? So I think reaching out to just random people, and some of them are going to respond to you and they're going to be receptive, but others, you know, they won't respond to you. But the people that have responded and we've created this like little support group, and they've allowed me into their group, I guess I should say. And I really look forward to getting, like, I hope to get to work with Mike Schultz in the future. And working with ABR has been just a gift. And I'm hoping that, you know, you don't see, there are some fabulous female amputee athletes out there, but you don't see a lot of them. And I'm hoping that people will see me doing these things and say, oh, hey, look, she's doing it. So like, hey, doc, look, this girl's doing it and she's fine, so I can do it. And I hope that especially for younger people that maybe have had a congenital defect that has led to amputation, that they can see those of us that are athletes out here doing our sport and say, hey, mom and dad, no, I can totally do whatever I want to do. So, sorry, that was a long side from being able to go on with my future, but I see no reason that there couldn't be an amputee that goes around Kentucky.
So what are the immediate goals then, Mellisa? What and you know how many horses are you hoping you can ride? I mean, what does the immediate future look like for you? What are your goals this year?
So initially it was AECs because I have Lucy qualified, but I had a little setback earlier this summer, and so just because I didn't want to spend the money and I feel like I can use it better other ways, I've decided to go ahead and hold off on that. But I've been jumping with and without my leg. So I've jumped around a 2-3 course without my leg at a show, blue ribbon clear round class. And so that can be done. So I started jumping with my leg for the first time, and that feels quite good and natural. So the goal is at this point that I'll be finishing out the year at novice, hopefully with like a schooling one day at beginner novice in August, and then a recognized one day at novice, assuming my dispensation comes in through USEF, which has been a bit delayed because of the Olympics going on. And then I'm hoping next year I can compete at training. I'm actually in the talks with a few people about a potential para horse or a couple different horses that might work. And so I would love to get my FEI classification. It looks like I'll probably be a grade 5 just because my amputation is my only my only limitation at this point. And then ideally, I'd like to go ahead and start doing the CPEDIs in Wellington and in Tryon, and see if that can possibly lead us to Paris in the future. And that's kind of a big, that's a big long reach, because financially that's a big deal, right? But that's kind of the goal.
Well, that's fantastic. That is a long-term goal then, as well as a short-term goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. And now what about running then? Are you hoping to get a running blade as well?
Yeah. So typically they don't do blades until you're about a year out from your amputation. And actually the foot I have right now is the first carbon fiber foot they ever used in the Paralympics back in the 80s. So this is my preparatory foot, and I should be able to do everything with this and learn how to use it before I go on to the next one. So likely by the end of the year, I'll have something like an all-pro that's designed for a little bit more athletics. A lot of CrossFitters use them because you can run with it short distances as well. But for the time being, my goal is to learn what I have and make the best of it.
Well, that's fantastic. So you will be able to satisfy your desire, your passion for running.
That's the plan. And there's a few ultra runners out there that are running with blades and have had some very interesting stories on how they've lost them. And I figure it would be nice to be able to join them. So even if I can run a 50K and, maybe go back and help pace people at the back of the pack at marathons, that would make me really happy.
Well, there's some great ambitions there. So what would your message be then, Mellisa, to any young people listening to this who have a disability or who feel they may be inhibited or restricted from, future sporting activities?
So I would tell, whether you're young or older, that the only limitation is your mind. And if you're told that you can't do something or that something is not an option, you need to change the question. Because by changing the question, you change the answer in a lot of cases. And really, anything is possible. And at the end of the day, you are your own best advocate, and you need to fight for your life. Because you're worth it.
Message. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a wonderful message to end on, Mellisa. So the future looks a lot brighter than it did 2 years ago, and you're really making progress by the sounds of things. So, you can design your own future now in a way much more than you could certainly before the amputation.
Yeah, most definitely.
Fantastic. Well, great story, Mellisa. I really appreciate you taking time to share it with us, and I want to wish you the very, very best of luck with it. Onwards to Paris as a para rider. This is really exciting. We'll have to follow your progress.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see. Paris might be a bit of a stretch. LA might be a little bit more realistic, but
there you go.
But there's definitely a future now. So it's cool.
It really is. There's some great ambitions there. Well, the best of luck, Mellisa, and thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
And if you know of a rider who has an interesting story that we should be sharing here on the show, do drop us a line to info@wispsports.com, or you can message us on social media, of course, @wispsports. The show notes and the links to this program are on the website at wispsports.com. Just look for The Horse Show under the Listen tab. And if you have a moment when you're on your podcast app to leave us a review or a rating, that always helps others find us here at The Horse Show. And of course, if you're interested in other women's sports, there's plenty of that on our podcasts at Wisp Sports on the main channel or on wispsports.com. And finally, if you'd like to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, you can do so on the website at wispsports.com. Just click on the Sign Up tab on the top right-hand corner of the home page. And that way you get to keep up with all the latest news here at Wisp Sports. So until the next time, thank you for listening and helping us turn up the volume on women's sports. Goodbye for now.